2,000 years ago, Iron Age Britain was on the very edge of the known world. We've been told it was a wild and inhospitable place, untouched by civilization. Our Iron Age ancestors were primitive, warlike, hard-drinking, and they practiced strange, barbaric customs like headhunting. Now, this is not a picture painted by our ancestors themselves. They left us no written records. Instead, it is the description we get from the people who came to conquer them, the Romans. And it looms large in our imaginations. But now archaeologists are challenging that view of life in Britain before the Romans.
Oh. We suppose it's always the Romans who invent these things, but there it is.
And their dig diaries are capturing for us all their extraordinary finds. We discover that Iron Age hill forts might not be forts at all. We dive into a loch's cold waters to reveal the impressive skills of Iron Age builders.
Oh my gosh, wow, how exciting is that?
And at the heart of this Digging for Britain special, we get exclusive access to a newly discovered and truly spectacular grave.
Well done.
It sheds light on everything from our Iron Age ancestors' engineering prowess to their spiritual beliefs to how they like to stage a celebration. I'll be in the lab where archaeologists will bring in everything from metalwork to human remains. And archaeologist Raksha Dave will use the latest scientific techniques to examine these finds and unlock the secrets of pre-Roman Britain.
This is absolutely extraordinary.
This is helping us to tell a very different story of life in the Iron Age. Welcome to Digging for Britain. For this special programme, I've come to the Museum of London. It's a fitting place to explore the real legacy of our Iron Age ancestors. The Romans founded London, or Londinium, and this wall marks the boundary of their new city. It was from here that they set out to tame the British savages, to bring them firmly under the imperial yoke. But did the ancient Britons really need civilising? Our lead investigation takes us north to the small town of Pocklington on the edge of the Yorkshire Wolds. In 2014, archaeologists working at Burnby Lane, the site of a new housing development, unearthed a remarkable find.
Very exciting, 3 barrows now.
They found a series of Iron Age burial mounds known as square barrows.
That's six burials in this one barrow alone.
We came here 8 months ago, anticipating a couple of square barrows, but in fact we've actually got an Iron Age cemetery. We've excavated over 60 barrows and 101 skeletons to date.
The team have since recovered a further 70 skeletons, making this one of the largest Iron Age cemeteries ever discovered in Britain.
Oh, looking good. Extremely good.
But in the spring of 2018, a mile down the road, the team made an even more sensational discovery.
These are the 2 wheels standing upright. They'll probably extend another 90 centimetres into the ground.
It's the first sign of a chariot burial.
Usually they're totally dismantled, the wheels are laid flat, all components are taken apart and laid within the grave. This one is as if it's up and ready to go, really.
This is only the 3rd fully assembled chariot burial found in Britain. A chariot was the Iron Age equivalent of a sports car and a tank at the same time, and the team have just uncovered its driver.
The chariot also has a passenger compartment, rectangular stain of darker soil, and within the passenger compartment, Martin's cleaning up the human burial.
But the discovery of 2 animal skeletons transforms this already unusual burial into something completely unprecedented.
What makes this one special is the chariot attached to these 2 ponies. To have a chariot with horse burials is almost unheard of.
You can see at the front here, we actually have the leg of the horse going down vertical. This is the only example we know of in the UK that has upright horses.
Archaeologists have never discovered such a complete chariot burial as this.
It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and what we can see here is one of the most dramatic burials we know of from this area in the Iron Age.
For us, this is the most significant chariot that we've excavated, and it's changing our outlook and perception of the Iron Age.
This chariot burial is one of the most exciting Iron Age discoveries ever found in Britain. I've invited site director Paula Ware and Iron Age expert Melanie Giles into the studio to find out what the contents of this burial reveal about life in the Iron Age. Paula, this really is an incredible find. I've never seen anything like it.
I know, we were really surprised. 2 upright ponies, chariot,
Yeah.
and a skeleton, just amazing.
And the poor ponies have lost their heads. They would have once been up in the barrow, and that's been sheared off by the plough millennium
Right.
ago, probably. But your average Iron Age burial is very simple, often no grave goods at all. And where you do get them in that Burnby Lane site, they're delicate and they're nice, but they're quite simple. Little bow brooches with a little foot that would have had some decoration on it, a little red glass bead on this tiny one here, and occasionally some very exquisite little glass beads, like this one. This has a lovely kind of spiral design on it. But they're low-key, so when we see something like this, it really is stand out.
Now, how have they got the ponies into that grave in that position?
From what we can tell, they're an old pair of ponies. They're a tried and tested team, and maybe they trust their owners and, you know, go into the pit. And so I would guess that they're actually encouraged to take that jump down into the grave pit. And then you get the chariot in, harness them up and slit their throats as you backfill rapidly around them.
Because if you were to get the pony in and then kill the pony, it would fall over.
Yes.
They have not fallen over.
No.
So they must have been piling the soil back in and round.
I don't think you could have killed
those
2
bodies.
ponies unless you did it simultaneously.
Yeah.
They wouldn't stay in position.
And I think seeing this excavation, you are tapping into what an incredible spectacle that funeral must have been.
We think that a lot of people have gathered around to view this body around the graveside. This is a moment that sticks in their memory, and they didn't write records, but presumably they did sing songs and tell stories. And in one sense, we're the last witnesses to that drama, that spectacle of the funeral, which really is, for my money, probably the most spectacular burial I've seen in Iron Age Britain.
Yeah. I think what's interesting is you look at a grave like this and you see just how sophisticated it is. And this is not the picture of the Iron Age Britons that the Romans give us. I mean, they paint the Iron Age Britons as uncivilised barbarians.
Yes, but they're seeing them from the outside and they're trying to conquer them. So they're going to exaggerate those features that they find barbaric or strange. They're going to make them sound like very worthy enemies. And it's only in unpicking both the bodies of the ponies, the bodies of the individual, the finds, the crafting behind it, and the drama, the spectacle, that we'll fully understand his story.
Over the course of this programme, we'll follow the team as they discover what this burial can tell us about our Iron Age ancestors. Of the 25 chariot burials found in Britain, 23 have been in East Yorkshire. It looks like the signature of a single tribe. The landscape of Iron Age Britain, divided up amongst tribes, was culturally diverse. But another culture was advancing across Europe as the Roman Empire expanded. Wherever they went, they took with them a common language and a unified culture. So for the Romans, the rich and varied tribal culture of the ancient Britons represented not just a challenge, but a threat. And none of the tribes in Iron Age Britain posed more of a threat to Roman rule than the tribes who lived in modern-day Scotland. Roman authors dismissed them as a disorganised rabble. But new archaeological evidence from our second site at Loch Tay in Perthshire is challenging that description. Loch Tay was home to 18 prehistoric buildings called crannogs. They were houses that looked like this reconstruction and were built on the loch bed itself. There are over 500 crannogs in Scotland, and they're amongst the most famous prehistoric features in the landscape. They are impressive pieces of engineering. No one could work out if Loch Tay's crannogs were built one by one over many centuries, or at the same time to form a village. But now a team of archaeologists from the Living on Water project are trying to find out.
If they're occupied at the same time, the timber, labour and other resources required to build one of these sites, and indeed to then occupy it, is really quite a vast amount and a real large investment.
This would be evidence of an organised community capable of extraordinary feats of construction. But to discover if this was the case, the team needs to excavate the remains of the crannogs.
So we're at Fernan Crannog, and 2,500 years ago in this spot would have been a crannog. Crannogs are artificial island dwellings, usually built of timber and stone, on top of which sat a timber roundhouse.
For the past 2 summers, Michael and his team of underwater archaeologists have been searching for timbers at 6 of the Loch's crannogs.
So we're quite lucky with Fernan Crannog in that Fernan is so shallow on top that we're actually able to do a lot on snorkel.
The divers spend all day shifting stones to try to get to the Iron Age timbers underneath.
So a lot of our work on this site means picking up stones like this.
As we peel back the rubble, around the base of the crannog was one very well preserved timber that had a mortise hole cut through it, used to join it to another timber. And that's a fantastic constructional detail.
And this remarkable insight into Iron Age carpentry is only possible because the mud of the loch bed is devoid of oxygen. So these ancient timbers are in pristine condition.
The timbers are 2,500 years old, and they look like fresh cut timber until they come out into the atmosphere, and then they usually relatively quickly turn black.
So the object really is to sample as many timbers as we can. We then take these timbers back to the lab to see if they all were perhaps cut down at the same time.
Archaeologists can usually employ 2 methods to date wood: tree ring dating or dendrochronology, and radiocarbon dating. Unfortunately, tree ring dating doesn't work well for Iron Age Central Scotland, and radiocarbon dates for this period are notoriously imprecise, providing very wide date ranges.
This period is a real tough spot in terms of what we know about where people were living and how they were living. And that is due to this quirk and how radiocarbon dating works over the period 800 to 400 BC.
Discover the past with exclusive ancient history documentaries and ad-free podcasts presented by world-renowned historians from History Hit. Watch them on your smart TV or on the go with your mobile device. Download the app now to explore everything from the wonders of Pompeii to the rebellion of Boudica and the mysteries of prehistoric Scotland. Immerse yourself in the captivating stories of this remarkable era by signing up via the link in the description.
So the team are applying a method called wiggle match that very precisely maps the levels of radioactive carbon found in the tree rings of this timber to date the crannogs. If they discover that the crannogs were all built around the same time, it will transform our understanding of life on Iron Age Loch Tay. Mike and Derek are joining me in the studio to reveal their results.
We have some of these artifacts from Oakbank Crannog, just the one.
This is on Loch Tay.
And this is on Loch Tay, that's
Yeah.
right. And this is one of those timbers that seems to suggest something within the domestic structure that would have sat on top of the crannog. And we can see that from the mortise at the end there, the partial mortise.
This here?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
As well as the dowling.
These here?
Yes, those are the dowels there. And what's interesting about the dowels is that they've been hand-carved, probably with a knife, so we can actually see the tool marks at the edge of the dowel.
I mean, this is sophisticated woodworking.
This whole community are master craftsmen, master carpenters. They're using almost exclusively oak and alder. Oak is, of course, very strong. Alder, when it's waterlogged, it maintains its structural integrity better than just about any other kind of wood species. And that sort of just speaks to their mastery of carpentry and understanding of forest resources.
So we've got these big timbers which are all about the construction of the buildings themselves, but then also wooden artefacts being preserved, which is lovely. I love this.
Yes.
What is it?
That's a butter dish.
How do you know it's a butter dish?
Lipid analysis from material on the inside of it.
Some kind of solid dairy product.
Yes, high fat content.
So is this it? That's it. That is Iron Age butter.
Yeah, yeah. There's a question mark at the end
cheese.
of that. But yes.
Yeah, and it's fromage free. What about these other artifacts then? Is that a spindle whorl?
Yes. So we've got spindle whorl. We've got a knife.
Yeah.
We've got a whistle over here, a nice little small whistle, and this is a bit of textile.
Oh wow. I mean, this fabric's just beautiful, isn't it? The weaving of that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
It gives us a tiny little insight into what they had in their homes, what they might have been wearing, that sort of thing, which is so elusive in archaeology.
That's a nice little chunk.
So how precise can you now be about the dates of these crannogs?
Using the dendrochronology as well as radiocarbon wiggle matching, we're starting to see that crannogs are being constructed at the same time, pretty much bang in the middle of the first millennium BC. So it's actually changed things quite a bit.
Yeah. So you may be looking at a real kind of clustering of crannog building over a century to a century and a half.
Yeah, I mean, it's looking like it's a community that's actually living on the water.
What comes along with that, particularly when we consider just how much material is required to build a crannog, is there is a very sophisticated understanding of how to manage a woodland and how to maintain that resource so that you can continue to occupy crannog, build a new one, and maintain the ones that you have already constructed.
So I think the burning question is why were they doing this? I mean, it seems a lot of effort to go to build a house out on a loch rather than just building it on the land.
The traditional interpretation has always been defense or protection. And I think that it perhaps overstates the level of violence that we have evidence for in the early Iron Age. But of course, we are really left with a big question mark of why people feel the need to build these things when they are such an enormous investment of labor and resources.
So we still don't really know why they're building crannogs, but at this point in time, we are definitely looking at quite large communities coming together, certainly more than one crannog operating at the same time, and evidence of master carpentry.
Definitely. That's a story that's taking shape right now.
The Loch Tay excavations provide a counterpoint to that Roman suggestion of a backwards people in ancient Scotland. Instead, we're seeing a community of skilled craftspeople who could deliver well-organised and ambitious projects. And in East Yorkshire, even more evidence is starting to emerge of sophisticated Iron Age engineering.
What I'm doing now is trying to identify any spokes that may still survive in the wheel. You might just about see the shadow of one there. And then a triangular area here, which is between two spokes running like that. And darker brown soil here is where the wooden wheel rim was.
Whilst the chariot's wooden structure has rotted away, its iron tyres are still well preserved. And gradually the team is finding more and more pieces of Iron Age metalwork.
But it's a pretty thick, functional piece of iron, that. And then this small ring attached to the side of it, what that does is lock the whole wheel together. It fixes the hub to the axle, which is sticking through the end there. Otherwise your wheel might fly off as you're rolling along. The end of the hub is protected by this thin bronze band. It's got this decorative rib running along the centre. It would look special, wouldn't it, on the outside of the wheel?
By week 10, the tyres are ready for lifting, and it's conservator Mag Felter's job to get them out without breaking them.
So today we're dealing with the western wheel. The plan is to get the wheels supported as far as possible with plaster of Paris bandages. You can see I've already started here.
The iron tyres are over 2,000 years old and extremely delicate. One wrong move and they could easily shatter into pieces.
You could probably do with an extra pair of hands just to hold it, just to grab the top.
Yeah, that enough.
Well done. Do you want a break?
Yeah, I think
Or behind me, perhaps? Good work, guys. Really nice. Well done.
The wheels were forged as continuous rings of iron, evidence of consummate metalworking skill.
We're going that way round. Nice work, guys. Well done.
Excavations of sites like Pocklington have allowed experts to reconstruct ancient British chariots. To find out more about how these vehicles were made, I've invited chariot builder Robert Herford and archaeologist Peter Hulken into the studio.
Robert, this is a wonderful little model of an Iron Age chariot that you've made here, and I think it's fascinating to look at how it's put together. Are you going to demonstrate how you attach the yoke onto the pole here?
Well, yes. They must have used, as the ancient Egyptians, they must have used rawhide. It has this lovely way of when you've put it on and left it to dry, it becomes like that.
Yeah.
And it shrunk a little bit.
And it shrinks a bit, yeah.
Yes, and it's stiff. And
Go on then, you're going to tie that on?
I'll try.
And then we've got other joints here. What's that?
That is a British linchpin.
So this is the linchpin just here. So this is like a, once you undo that thong, that's quite a neat, quick-release mechanism to take the wheel off the axle. And it's an amazing bit of metalwork, isn't it, Peter?
Well, this thing is quite extraordinary because what you're looking at is the ability to use two kinds of metals together.
Yeah, I mean, it's the bronze is unnecessary, really, isn't it? The iron will do the job.
This is demonstrating real showing off. This is the bling of the Iron Age, if you like. But the iron alone, if you look behind you and look at the tyre, to make the iron for one of these vehicles takes about 300 person days. And burying one of these things would be the equivalent today of somebody burying their Mercedes. So these are really a demonstration of the power and prestige of these people buried with these vehicles.
Have you finished tying this
Well,
on?
I'm getting to a point where when this lot's shrunk a bit and gone hard, it will be a nice stiff joint, that.
You get a great strong but flexible joint then between the yoke and the pole here. So it's better than a bolt, really, isn't it?
Yes, it's certainly a lot better than a bolt.
So, Peter, do you think that Iron Age people were using vehicles like this to move around the landscape?
We know they were, because what aerial archaeology has shown is that people move from community to community along trackways like this. And one trackway in a settlement not that far away, up on the Wolds, we've actually got the roots here and here surviving, and they're about the same width across the axle as the chariots would have been.
So they've been created by chariot wheels?
We know, and the evidence is here quite clearly in front of us, that they were using it to drive carts or chariots along.
So what do you think this was used for? I mean, is it effectively a road across the landscape?
These were quite well engineered because you're on the chalk.
Yeah.
So they were very clever, take off the topsoil, and there you've got a surface.
So you think they are stripping away the topsoil then? So they're doing something. They're not just driving things up and down. I mean, this is extraordinary because I think that we just tend to assume that it was the Romans that brought us roads, and that, you know, before then our ancestors were just kind of roaming willy-nilly all over the landscape. And that this is a feat of engineering.
Yeah, and what is quite incredible is there are hundreds of these interconnecting communities in the Iron Age. It was not a kind of woodland of wild people. It was organised, and we've got quite amazingly, quite near the Pocklington chariot, this trackway, really quite close to where the burial was. So the archaeological evidence suggests that this is actually contemporary with that burial. So bizarrely, we may have the very trackway that that chariot made its last journey on with the horses before that quite spectacular burial ritual.
The ancient lanes crisscrossing the Yorkshire wolds make us question that old assumption that the Romans were the first to introduce roads to Britain. These lanes are evidence that this area was already home to a well-connected society well before the Roman invasion. But how far did these people travel? To find out, archaeologist Raksha Dave is joining Richard Madrick, an archaeological scientist from Cardiff University.
You've got rather a large array of human remains here.
We do. So these are from a range of different sites across Iron Age Somerset. So some of these remains were excavated over 150 years ago and have been subject to very little research at all since their original excavation. So they're really a gold mine in terms of opportunities for reanalysis.
So what is it that you're trying to find out?
Well, I'm particularly interested in knowing where these individuals came from. So every time any human consumes food and drink, chemical signals from those foodstuffs are transferred into the body and become locked in the bones and the teeth. Teeth provide us with a wealth of information about early life origins, because once your teeth develop when you're a child, they don't remodel thereafter. If we can just take a small amount of dental enamel, we get a snapshot, a chemical signal relating to where the people were during their early life. So I'm particularly interested to see whether these people were born and raised in Somerset or whether they've come from elsewhere.
Richard's analysis of these Somerset teeth is one of archaeology's first attempts to sketch the geographical origins of Iron Age Britons.
This is the grand reveal. These are your results of what you have so far.
Yeah, these are our first results from the humans from Iron Age Somerset. And you can see most of the data clusters around the middle portion of the graph, and we'd assume that the vast majority of those people are local to the West Country or to southern Britain, but we do have some very clear outliers here.
What are those two doing up there?
Their oxygen values are markedly higher than the rest of the data set, and I think there's a very, very strong chance that they are not from Britain at all. And even these three individuals here sit outside of 95% of all humans that have been analysed from Britain of any period. So they really, really are quite exceptional.
That's extraordinary. So where do you think that these individuals are from?
It's difficult to pinpoint it, but the Mediterranean is an option. Northern Iberia is a possibility as well. It's really transforming our understanding of Iron Age society in the West Country. I've only analysed 38 individuals, and it looks like 5 of them, which is quite a high percentage really, were not raised in Britain. So it's suggesting that it was much, much more diverse than we would have thought.
Richard's research is groundbreaking and, combined with the Yorkshire trackways, suggests that people could travel long distances in pre-Roman Britain.
Back at the Pocklington Chariot Burial, archaeologists are hoping to find out more about the identity of the Chariot Rider.
We're pretty sure it's a male now. We also know he's quite a tall individual. I mean, he's about 5'8". The plan next is to actually remove the bones. So the pelvis will come out, the skull will come out, and then it's just a case of how long it takes to free it. There we go.
Oh gosh. Wow, nice edge there. Yeah, great.
With the skeleton removed from the grave, the team can see a hint of a metal object beneath.
Yeah, it's maybe this.
So we've got a nice big overshape. It's a flat, very thin plate of some kind.
As they excavate further, they find something very special.
It has that kind of rim lip on the edge, so it's kind of a rim around the edge. So there's this shield that was found at Arras, which is very, very similar.
Martin's hunch is right. The dead man's body was laid on top of a bronze shield.
It looks like it's an edge piece.
Wow.
This will give us the width of the wood that the shield is made from. This is quite fantastic. How exciting is that? You've got the boss of the shield dipping down. You can see the edge of it here. We would have a wooden part of the shield in this area fastened in place with rivets here. We have quite a complex structure. You can see a plate here, and then you've got a sort of outer circle as well in this area.
They don't find a sword or any other weapon in the grave. But could this shield be evidence of a powerful warrior, a figure to match Rome's stereotype of a war-mad Briton?
I think it's quite moving that this is the remains of this man that was buried with such pomp.
Yeah, it is,
Yes,
isn't it? It is, it really
yeah.
is.
Yeah. So he looks old. I mean, these are not the bones of a young man.
He's got a lot of wear and tear to the body, very few teeth left.
This is a man when he smiled. There were no teeth there.
Yes. So he's quite a characterful figure, I would say.
And his fingers are interesting. So where the ligaments attach that keep your tendons in place, we've got all this extra bone growth. There's a ridge of bone on each side. And it's very tempting, isn't it, to say, well, he is a charioteer.
It's rain work.
All of that rain work. And do you think he would have been seen as a warrior? I mean, is a chariot an emblem of a warrior?
I think the chariot is so much more than a weapon. It can be a weapon, but it's a weapon usually, even the Roman authors tell us, of intimidation. But it's also a stage for oration. It's a very dramatic way of arriving in a village if there's a dispute, to command people or persuade them, perhaps, that they should resolve their differences. So he might be seen as quite a powerful peace figure, you know, who's somebody who's able to mediate in disputes. But the shield does speak of that martial culture, but the shield, I think, is there to remind us that his time for being a warrior is over.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah. He's a defender of his community, and if need be, he can use all his power and his connections to intimidate people, but his main strength lies in being able to defend his own.
There's a lot of wear and tear. There are injuries, but there's nothing that's obviously a weapon injury here.
No, there's nothing to say that there's a blunt force trauma injury.
We know amongst these communities there are lower rates of sharp force, penetrating violence from blades like swords or axes compared with many other regions in Britain. And that, to me, is a puzzle, because on the surface of it, you look at the chariots, the swords, the shields, they look like the most martially obsessed group in Britain, and yet violence is lower. And I can't help but think that's because actually they're quite successful at doing a lot of posturing, swaggering, bravado, but that is quite effective at keeping the actual bloodshed at a lower level.
The archaeologists lift the shield, ready for conservation.
3, 2, 1.
But with no signs of violence on the skeleton, or evidence for an especially violent community, was this shield more than simply a weapon of war?
One of the biggest traps that we can fall into in archaeology is assuming that a particular artefact has a simple, single explanation. A spear is for sticking in someone. A shield is just for protection in battle.
To find out more about the hidden meanings carried by Iron Age shields, I'm taking a look at one of the most beautiful examples found in Britain.
Jackie, this is a replica of one of our most iconic British Iron Age objects. It's a Battersea shield. It's beautiful.
It's exquisite, isn't it? And being a replica, the lovely thing is that we can actually get very up close to it. It's the front portion of a shield. So the shield itself would probably have been of wood. And then we have these 3 circular panels with this very typical kind of sinuous designs.
So it's beautiful. Wow.
And then we also have these 27 red glass paste roundels, each with a sort of swastika in metal. We talk about it being deposited in the river near Battersea, and that's where it was found in the Thames in 1857.
We're left wondering why something ends up in the river, because it must be an incredibly high-status object. There's a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of metal has gone into this.
I think generally, because it's such a prestigious item, it's undoubtedly symbolic of power, of wealth. Is it used in warfare? We don't think it's seen much use. It's in very good condition, and therefore we have to see it as having a kind of a symbolic reason for it going into the river.
Yeah.
And the river would have been a very special place. It's a frontier, it's a major life force for the people living in this area at that time. So is it a votive offering, which is symbolising the power of those that were alive, that owned it?
So if it's a votive offering, that suggests that you're getting rid of a lot of wealth, demonstrating that you can do that somehow without losing power and status.
It's conspicuous consumption in a way, isn't it? It is, you know, you are discarding something that is so highly valued, and this would have been a real treasure to those people. It would have been a real one-off as well.
Many pieces of Iron Age metalwork, such as swords and shields, have been found in watery places like rivers and bogs. They're clearly not just functioning as weapons, but imbued with heavy symbolism. And our next dig at the early Iron Age hill fort of Peniclothii in Flintshire is uncovering more evidence that the Roman image of violent British barbarians was way off the mark.
Hill forts are monumental feats of building, and given the Romans' depiction of ancient Britons as warlike savages, it's not surprising that hill forts have often been interpreted as military strongholds. But now some archaeologists are taking a closer look, and they're discovering a different and actually much more interesting story.
Peniclothii hill fort is huge, enclosing 19 hectares of Welsh heathland, 440 metres above sea level.
On a clear day, you can actually pick out Blackpool Tower, and on a really clear day, you can see the hills of Cumbria. So it's just stunning.
Rachel Pope is leading a team of students from Liverpool University as they excavate a cross-section through Peniclothii's stone ramparts to try to understand how the hill fort was built and what it was used for.
This one.
Yeah, it's definitely above that one.
OK, so we're now deconstructing the rampart.
Immediately beneath the grass bank lies a 2-metre-high rampart of earth and stone.
And we have come across this wonderful brown clay.
It's surprising evidence that this Iron Age stonework is more advanced than previously thought.
See this? It's dried now, but when it's wet, this is a very sticky clay. And we've got a band of it running along here. So this is our early Iron Age bonding material. So they're actually using clay to cement these structural blocks together. And I don't think we really understood that Iron Age architecture employed that sort of agent in construction. I suppose that it's always the Romans who invent these things, but there it is.
The 2-metre-high rampart extends for at least 2 kilometres around the hilltop. It's not surprising that hill forts have long been viewed as defensive strongholds. But in week 2, the students discover evidence of an earlier, much smaller structure that challenges this interpretation.
So this is the phase 1 construction here. So it looks like, with careful excavation, we've actually found the earliest phase of construction of the hill fort.
Compared with the later rampart, this original construction was much smaller, only 90 centimetres high. Not much use for defence.
When you're excavating them, what you realise is that they're walls. It would have been a walled enclosure.
This low wall opens up the question of why Peniclothii was really built. Rachel and her team keep digging to try to find more clues.
OK, so at the start of this season, this whole area was filled by a very meaty early Iron Age rampart built in stone, and as you can see, we've successfully excavated it back to natural. The only feature that isn't natural now is this stone here. It was actually chocked into position, we think, with some of these stones around it. So we're assuming this is to do with marking out, laying out the position of the build. So this is the very first event as it's happening. They're marking out around where they want to build the rampart right at the very start of the process.
The team has excavated what they think are the earliest remains of the hill fort.
This isn't something that's thrown up. This is a long-term, probably intergenerational construction project.
But actually, these foundation stones are not the earliest structure here.
Oh my God! Wow. We've got at the very base of the rampart now some horizontal timbers. This is really gorgeous archaeology.
These are the carbonised remains of a hazel fence that dates back 3,000 years to the late Bronze Age. This formed an earlier enclosure at the summit of Penaclothiae.
It's pretty cool. It's a burnt timber palisade, and in it we have a series of 5 burnt stumps, and the best one is there.
The hazel fence and the diminutive height of the early walls call into question whether Penaclothiae was actually a fort at all.
We're probably not looking at enormous numbers of people living in this hill fort, really. We know they're not up here all year round because, to be honest, it's quite nippy on this August day. It's not a permanent sort of township, if you like. So we think they're actually coming from quite some considerable distance to occupy these seasonally in the summer months.
I've invited Rachel into the studio to discuss her findings and how they might challenge that Roman depiction of British violence and aggression.
Rachel, I think what's amazing is that you see those big earthwork ramparts that people are quite familiar with when you look up and see a hill fort. But I don't think you imagine that actually what that is a big stone wall that's kind of got grassed over time.
Yeah, absolutely. But part of the struggle that we've had with interpreting these sites is that isn't really representative of how it was in the past. And right before the hill fort's built, there's a palisaded enclosure on the site here that we've now got samples from. So I've brought along some of the actual carbonised fence from the palisaded enclosure. It's burnt down. It's remarkable survival, really. You tend not to get this. So, you know, it's a bit of a find, really. And it's only after that phase has gone out of use that we see construction of the hill fort as we understand it.
Yeah.
And, you know, the fact that we're finding these new little details, the fact that we've got this sort of the bonding material, it's quite civilised. It's all very clever.
That bonding material I found fascinating. But have we come across that before in Iron Age architecture?
I think we may have done, but we've not understood that it was potentially prehistoric. So when we talked to hill fort experts, it was said, no, this you know, there's no such thing as this. And then we found it absolutely keyed into the structure of the wall itself. So we know that it's Iron Age.
So just trying to really get to grips with what they're about. It looks like a fort. It's got a big wall on it. Isn't this just an Iron Age castle?
Right from the get-go, we actually thought that hill forts were Roman. In fact, hill forts are actually largely out of use by the time we've got the Roman conquest. But we start using Roman terminology, so we start calling them hill forts. We're talking about them as military architecture.
Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of evidence for weaponry or, you know, dead bodies. At this phase 1 here, this wall is only about 90 centimetres high.
So it's only up. It's not even up to my hip. The evidence that we've got, the archaeology is suggesting that this seems to be structured around agriculture. So the 19 hectares of Penaclodii, it's about herds, and it's about livestock, and it's about moving people probably from quite some distance and bringing them together to trade their sheep with each other or to share ideas and exchange things and, you know, start to build society.
Penaclodii's walls grew larger and larger across the generations, and even though the hill fort's use may have changed over time, Rachel doesn't believe that it was built for defence.
We've talked about the Iron Age and held it up as the opposite of Roman civilization. We've always couched it in terms of the barbarians versus the civilized Romans. And actually, I think the people of Britain were actually remarkably civilized before Rome.
Back at the Museum of Somerset, archaeological scientist Richard Madrick is working on Iron Age bones retrieved from hill forts and settlements in southwest England. The bones were found dumped in pits and ditches, which some have claimed as evidence for Iron Age savagery. But Richard's work is increasingly challenging that view.
We do have an awful lot of remains that have been excavated from Iron Age Somerset, but as you can see, we don't have many whole bodies.
And why is that?
Well, this is a big debate. A lot of people have suggested for a long time that they were exposed to the elements, to scavengers, to agents like weathering, and therefore they became defleshed, disarticulated, and eventually became perhaps sort of unceremoniously deposited in pits and ditches in various Iron Age sites.
Do you think that they've been unceremoniously deposited because they met a violent end?
That's certainly a possibility. That's been suggested by some people, and there's certainly injuries which are consistent with sharp-bladed weapons. But of course, some of them could be the dismembering of the body after death has occurred. Very difficult to tell the difference there. So quite a lot of these theories have become received wisdom rather than based on a large body of evidence.
Richard's developed a technique to find out how these bones were treated after death. The key to his research is to examine thin cross-sections of each bone under the microscope to see whether the bacteria has attacked it.
This is a thin section of a humerus from Glastonbury Lake Village, and we can make out the blood vessels which run through the cells of bone. However, the vast majority of the samples we analysed were really, really poorly preserved, so I've got plenty that I can show you. See, I think without knowing anything about bone histology, you can tell
straight away
that this looks badly preserved, doesn't it?
It's a lot more murkier and muckier, this. You can't actually see any of those really nice holes with the blood vessels that go through.
The microscope reveals clear evidence of bone decay.
When you're buried as a complete individual, the bacteria in the guts migrate around the body and attack at the bone. So this means rather than the remains having been excarnated and exposed, which would mean the flesh would rapidly degrade and the bacteria would die, this individual was buried whole.
Richard's slides tell him that these remains were buried as complete skeletons. So why were they discovered in open pits as many separated bones?
This is the exciting element of the research, really, in that it looks that actually what was happening is these individuals were buried and then later, after a period of at least 6 months, revisited and parts of the body were taken away.
Richard has discovered that these bones weren't just dumped in the ground. The people who moved them clearly placed great value on how they were handled.
Richard, this is absolutely extraordinary. Your work is redefining what we think about the Iron Age and what they do with burials and their practices.
It really is. This is not just unceremonious deposition of the dead in any old pit that might be lying around. And on top of that, people have suggested that perhaps We're getting these disarticulated bodies because the Iron Age was a very violent period. But it doesn't look like the main reason why all these bones are becoming separated from the rest of their bodies is because they're being hacked to pieces. It looks much more like they're being buried, returned to, and then parts taken away.
Richard's work is uncovering practices that may seem strange and macabre to us, but back in Pocklington, archaeologists are finding further evidence that the way they buried their dead was of great importance to Iron Age communities.
All around we have what appears to be parts of animals, mostly pig. So we have a pig jaw and there's more teeth and jaw bones. We have various ribs. The ribs look like they could have been a joint of meat, which indicate that they've placed joints of meat on or around the burial.
A lot of the pig bones seem to be from juveniles. Suckling pig is your nice cut of meat, very sweet tasting meat. But it's also, in a way, a bit of waste of resources to consume your animals young. These haven't been fattened up for a year, which is an indicator that you've got a lot of money or a lot of wealth, and basically you can afford to take the best cuts of meat when you want.
The discovery of a meat hook amongst the pig bones proves a significant find.
Certainly, in a British Iron Age grave, that object has not been found. And it does give a bit of an insight into the way they're cooking and preparing the food.
The excavation is painting a picture of a huge feast accompanying this man's journey into the afterlife.
So this is the meat hook with the ribs?
To me, that's one of the most significant things. The fact that they've actually brought it on the meat hook itself. You know, this is hot from the feast. There's a moment of ceremony where somebody brings that and elaborately places it outside the chariot. That's their offering to a man they respect and want to send off with a little bit of a gift from them. There are about 6 pigs represented in the portions of meat that are brought to his graveside. We have a hog roast for a special ceremony like a wedding, and we expect that to feed a large number of guests. So to sacrifice 6 of them tells us about, to me, a massive funeral ceremony. So part of the lavishness of the send-off may be a few people using their connections and their wealth to make a big show of it. That's how their standing is now renegotiated amongst the living.
His death leaves a power vacuum.
It may well have done. And so how many pigs did you bring for the feast? What did you bring to, did you bring that shield? Was it his shield? Was it your shield? Those are all fascinating questions that we must ask when we deal with a burial.
It's such a colourful picture, this idea of an Iron Age funeral with this important man, this leader, this chieftain, lying in his open grave with his chariot and his horses, and the whole community converging to witness this event and feasting together. And right now, conservators at Museum of London Archaeology are working on an astonishing set of finds which demonstrates just how important feasting was to Iron Age society.
I'm joining John Thomas, whose team discovered 11 cauldrons near the village of Glenfield, near Leicester, and Liz Barham, who is conserving the cauldrons. I'm hoping their work can tell me more about how feasts bound Iron Age society together.
So this is a CT scan of this cauldron.
It is, yeah.
And it's picking up the iron really nicely and showing you details that you can't see here.
Yeah, so you can see the ring handles really clearly and the band that's attached to the rim, all made of iron. And then that's riveted to the copper bowl beneath, but that doesn't show up because the copper is so thin.
It is incredibly thin. I mean, where it's fragmented, you can see just how thin that metal is.
Yes, I mean, in some cases, with cauldrons of this type, the metal is even 1/10 of a millimetre thick in places. So they're terribly skillful in making copper bowls of that thickness. They've averaged out at about 50 litres or so per cauldron.
That's a lot of broth, or whatever it was. I mean, do we know what was in them?
We have found some small pieces of bone in there and also some small charcoal pieces in areas on the surface.
But residues that have been found on similar cauldrons have shown that they've had meat stews in, honey-type mead drinks in them, so alcohol. But, you know, sort of catering on a large scale.
So this is just one of how many cauldrons did you find?
We got 11 complete ones and broken fragments of many others all across the site.
So it's a lot of cauldrons altogether. Why do they need so many cauldrons?
They're thought to be involved in large groups of people coming together certain times of the year, perhaps to celebrate marriages or mourn people have died, or just bringing people together for creating workforces. So, you know, if you needed something like a big roundhouse building, you get your neighbours in and say, build us a roundhouse and we'll give you a good feast afterwards. And that may be what's going on here.
Whether laid on when a crannog was raised or to accompany a spectacular funeral, feasts were the glue that held Iron Age society together.
That's the end of the excavation. Everything's been removed and recorded.
After 11 weeks of excavation, Paula's team of archaeologists have finished unearthing this extraordinary chariot burial. Now, using 3D photography of the skull and the latest modelling techniques, we can paint a portrait of the man it honoured.
So we know he was at least in his late 40s, if not a bit older, and you've had a facial reconstruction done. The moment of revelation.
Oh. Well, he's somebody I'd follow.
He looks powerful.
He does, yeah. He is an older individual, you can see that already, that sense of exuding an air of authority. And I think, you know, his burial is set apart in the landscape. He has some fame, some renown, and is somebody who's looked to in all sorts of situations.
The isotope analysis says he's from the locality, although he's moved around. He originally was on the chalk, which we could interpret as the higher worlds, and then in later life has moved. So, no, we're going with he's a local.
Yeah. We found out more about the community, the society at Pocklington in the Iron Age. How has this contributed to our understanding of Iron Age Britain?
To me, it's valuable because they didn't write records, and so the way in which they're orchestrating this funeral with the ponies pulling the chariot, the drama that happens around this, the placing of the body, the placing of the joints from the feasts, the little grave goods, the degree of craftsmanship that's gone on in the making of the things that go into that grave, the technology of that chariot. That enables us to tell a much richer story of these people than we could ever have gleaned from the classical authors' accounts.
The Romans painted the ancient Britons as barbaric and warlike. But the archaeological digs that we've followed across Britain this year give us a different view. Our digs show us that these so-called savages lived in sophisticated and well-connected communities. The chariot, the two ponies, and the stunning bronze shield reveal the achievements of the Iron Age in one spectacular burial. Smart engineering, highly skilled metalwork, and sophisticated beliefs were all brought together to send this figure on his way to the afterlife. These digs are revealing that far from being warlike thugs, the Iron Age Britons didn't need civilizing at all.